All right, welcome to Emotions Matters webinar panel number 4. This is the journey to finding community. This is the fourth part of our BPD Fest month webinar series on the theme of overcoming borderline personality disorder, pathways to well-being. So we're delighted that you could join us today. My name is Sarah Rosenberg, and I'm a volunteer for Emotions Matter. While I'm doing the introductions, we invite you to write in the chat where you're joining us from today. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, everybody. I'd love to see where everybody's from, if it's in the United States or around the world. Super excited. So we're going to go ahead and have some slides up here. I'm going to introduce Emotions Matter a little bit. Emotions Matter is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2015 to support, educate, and advocate for those impacted by borderline personality disorder. Our vision is to create a world in which every person with BPD has access to treatment and resources to achieve a meaningful recovery. To learn more about us and our programs, please visit our website. It's emotionsmatterbpd.org. We want to especially acknowledge our sponsors who generously support our work at Emotions Matter. We are proudly able to offer peer support at no cost to the community because of the generosity of our donors and corporate sponsors. So we have New York Presbyterian, the Francesco and Mary Giambelli Foundation, Karen Lerner Family Foundation, the Fishman Family Foundation, McLean Hospital, Silver Hill Hospital, the Colbeth Family Fund, Boehringer Ingelheim, Eastern Services, NEPDA, DBT Works, and NEABPD. Thank you so much to all our sponsors. So tonight's structure for our webinar, it's going to be a panel format. It's going to last 1 hour. After the introductions and reviewing our community guidelines, we'll hold a panel discussion, and questions and answers will follow at the end. And Emotions Matters philosophy. So Emotions Matter strives to create a safe, judgment-free space for all people with borderline personality disorder. We accept that there is a spectrum of experiences within the BPD community. We honor where people are on the journey without judgment or assumptions. We encourage people to define their own path towards recovery. We speak as experts of our own lived experience, not as medical experts. Professionals on our BPD Fest panel are volunteers speaking for educational purposes. And we have some safety guidelines and disclaimers. If at any time during BPD Fest 2025 you find yourself overwhelmed, struggling, or for any reason in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to your support system. Audience members may experience intense and painful emotions, feelings, memories, thoughts, and/or reactions to content shared. Participate at your own risk. You're also welcome to take a break from BPD Fest 2025 at any time or withdraw from it entirely. In the event of a medical, including mental health emergency, please seek care through a doctor, hospital, or emergency call number such as 988 or 911 in the United States immediately. Okay, and then we have some guidelines for community engagement. Questions during sessions should be asked using the Q&A box, not the chat. Comments can be made in the chat box. Use respectful language in the session chat. Any inappropriate messaging, including harassment, bullying, or monopolizing the chat, will be deleted. We accept difference and promote acceptance, especially with regard to gender, sexual orientation, identity, race, ethnicity, age, religion, disability, or politics. Avoid explicit expressions of self-harm or trauma, which may be upsetting to others. Panels will be recorded and available after the conference. No screenshots or recording on personal devices. All right, and I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers tonight. Clyde Clark lives in Eastern Oregon with his amazing dog, Guy. After years of recovery from BPD, OCD, and schizoaffective disorder, he spends his time as a mentor, peer advocate, and lifelong student. He advocates for the power of healthy habits, growing purpose, and heroic level journaling. Andre Grant is an Emotions Matter board member and a mental health advocate. He loves working out, reading, and is an avid movie buff. He enjoys exploring nature, hiking, and volunteering with blood banks and food shelters. He's excited to advocate to a bigger audience and strives to make change for those with BPD. Bradford Larson. Bradford is 42 with a master's degree in marketing and international business. He has worked in the alcoholic beverage industry for the past 15 years. He has lived abroad in the Netherlands, New Zealand, Canada, and in the United States. Brad is someone with lived experience with BPD and has struggled with anxiety, depression, codependency, self-harm, substance abuse, and a loss of identity most of his life. Through therapy, community, and believing that there is a better life to be lived, he has overcome many of these challenges. And Oliver McDonald. My name is Oliver McDonald. I live in Guelph, Ontario, Canada, with my wife and 8-year-old son. I have lived with BPD my whole life, as well as other comorbid disorders like addiction and persistent depression disorder. My connection with Emotions Matter started after BPDFest 2021, where I became a member of this great community, a member of the board, and development operations IT leader and co-founder of the men's group. And our moderator tonight, Dr. Craig Rodriguez-Sayas, is an assistant professor in the clinical science area at the University of Michigan. His research focuses on understanding dimensional models of psychopathology and applying them to improve assessment, conceptualization, and intervention of psychiatric disorders. His research is also focused on understanding factors related to elevated prevalence of borderline personality disorder among LGBTQ+ populations. Thank you, all our panelists, and Craig, our moderator. I'm going to turn it over to you right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everybody for being here with us. I'm going to kick things off, and I'm going to talk to each of the panelists. I'm kind of going to go across based on how it's on my Zoom screen right now. So Brad, I guess I'll ask you to begin. So the first question is going to come to each of you all, so the others get a little time to think of it. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, you and your BPD journey. So when it was diagnosed, when symptoms maybe began, and the ones you struggled with the most, and perhaps what affected you.
Yeah, and thank you, Craig, and thanks for everyone joining us, and for Sarah and Elizabeth for working behind the scenes to do this. So I've struggled, from what I've learned, with BPD and BPD symptoms my entire life. I just didn't know what those were until maybe about 3 years ago. I just had found coping skills of how to navigate life, on my own. But as a teenager, I engaged in self-harm and other coping skills, and suicidal ideation. The negative self-talk is something I struggle with, and kind of a lack of identity or changing identity. And I tend to have really intense interpersonal relationships, but they can kind of alternate between an extreme idolization to like a pretty heavy, pushing people away or kind of devaluing them if you're following the DSM. And certainly a lot of rapid mood cycling, loneliness, and that emptiness that people with BP described, and also just overwhelming emotions, like being unable to process them. So I always looked at these things individually and never as parts of a whole. And the way I managed that for most of my life was through drugs and alcohol, and impulsive behaviors, whatever made me feel good at that moment. That was the thing that I was going to use to cope without thinking of the consequences. Or if I said something, then I might be held to my word later. And I've always sought validation from external sources, from other people. So I mask and change who I was to fit what I thought other people wanted, or how I thought they saw me, not necessarily what the reality is. So I kind of feel like I've lived my life as two people. The one I present to the outside world, and then the person inside that I take great pains and effort to hide and to not share. So it wasn't until I got sober and I started addressing my mental health that I even learned about BPD. And then through that, it gave me the language to be able to describe how I felt. So that was kind of the first step in my journey, was even identifying, having an answer to a lot of the questions I had. And that's how I found emotions matter. So it's been a lifelong journey, but yeah, the BPD healing process has really only begun for me for the last, I would say, 3 years. Oh, you're still muted, Craig.
Sorry, forgot that. Thanks, Brad. So I'm going to turn to Oliver now with the same question about, tell us a little bit about your BPD journey, kind of when things began, maybe when the diagnosis came up and how they affected you.
No problem. Thanks, Craig. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. It's really awesome to see the participation and the support. So a little bit about my BPD journey. So like Brad, I was basically born struggling with BPD symptoms. One of the biggest challenges I think I faced early on in my life is that I was born into a family that had little to no education on mental illness, and had little to no financial ability for proper care, right? So I wasn't seeing doctors regularly, like in engaging in any conversations to educate myself on that. Grew up in pretty rural areas where there was limited exposure to resources and things, and suffered a great degree of trauma as a result of being exposed to pretty heavy alcohol abusing parents. And some of the symptoms that I still struggle with in my life, I think, come from those very early days where, I quite often am told stories of I was the kid that was hard to handle, given back by the babysitter, put in a drawer because I couldn't stop crying by my parents, like just go away for a minute. And like that fear of isolation and abandonment has really been with me my whole life in some silent way. So through that, I learned that asking for help and showing true emotion was punished almost. So I really pushed that inside. Um, through the early teen years, going through high school, struggled to connect, made some friends, but nothing truly deep that still resonates a number of years later in my adult life, especially having moved around a lot. Like Brad, my coping mechanism through all of that, again, was drugs and alcohol. And I didn't really find out I had anything like diagnosable or definable with me until I was in my late 30s, early 40s. Coming out of high school, I was lucky. I was able to function relatively highly, but I maintained careers, was lucky to find a girlfriend, got married, had a kid. But unfortunately, growing up, I'd never really had any relationship with my dad. And about 10 years ago, he took his own life in another province in Ontario, and it happened on Christmas Eve. So it was one of these situations where that was the disabling moment that kind of pushed me off the rails, impacted my career, really impacted the personal life, and pushed me to a place where I had to go off work. And after coming off work was when I was diagnosed. And that's where, tonight's topic and discussion points are perfectly on point, because I was misdiagnosed originally with post-traumatic stress disorder, which I probably have, but I would say it's a comorbid versus a primary diagnosis, which I learned later on. So finding the appropriate treatment in the early days was difficult. But everybody was willing to accept you. If you had an addiction problem, there was places to go. But there was this challenge of feeling like I connected with any of that treatment, or resources that were available, especially being a man. And that's how I found Emotions Matter, was where I started Googling, found the resource, the border was irrelevant, technology was available, and that 3-day conference was life-changing for me. Just like tonight is truly life-changing, being in a room with people that you feel like understand you. From there, I started to develop a path to recovery. I still struggle today. you know, after a number of years through learning about it and trying to surround myself with the proper network. You know, it's an up and down journey, as I think we've all learned. Really, for me, the greatest symptoms and struggles today are managing my emotional dysregulation. You know, I call it my vibration, and today, you know, for example, it's off. I still struggle substantially with self-harm, and I call it silent self-harm. So I don't do things in a way that others can notice. So it's really a personal thing for me, but it is a struggle. And I find that, you know, having a connection in a community over the last 5 years with Emotions Matter is a place where I can go regardless of the point that I'm at. And you're always caught in some way by someone who understands where you're at in that moment. And I guess that's what led me to, you know, helping form the men's group, really leaning into this organization and trying to continue every day to find a way to stabilize my home life, get a little bit healthier, and maybe be here for a few years longer after learning that had I not been connected with the right supports after being diagnosed, I wouldn't have seen my son's first baseball game. And now looking back at the last 5 years, those storms were rough. They still are. But like those little things that still haven't happened yet are things that kind of keep me going. So I thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about my journey and my struggles. And I look forward to hearing from Clyde and Andre.
Thanks, Oliver. I'm going to turn to Clyde next. Same question, which is tell us a little bit about your BPD journey. When you were diagnosed, what kind of symptoms were the ones that really stuck out for you and how they affected you?
Yeah, I never really suspected I had anything like BPD when I was growing up. I was a very hyper child. I had a lot of behavior issues, but no one really, you know, raised any flags that it might be BPD. And then in my early 20s, I witnessed a trauma. And after that, my mental health just went out of control. All my BPD, my OCD, and my schizoaffective disorder just became this catastrophe in my life. And I was no longer able to deal with even day-to-day stresses. And I found a little while later that I had BPD and I got that diagnosis, but it was from a clinician that did not show any respect. Like, it essentially treated BPD as if I was a criminal and a horrible person. And I stopped working with her because it was destabilizing. And then I found someone who really was on my team. A therapist and a psychiatrist, and like they would have none of my defective story, my making myself the problem. And you know, they always held me accountable, which was great because you know, I was having trouble with that kind of regulation and you know, emotional control and stuff like that. And you know, so through that, I started doing DBT and acceptance commitment therapy. And I think that the biggest thing for me was learning that when I get when I get destabilized and stressed, my symptoms of my more extreme symptoms get a lot worse. And so I've learned a lot of ways to just de-stress my days, you know, build in time to unwind, stuff like that. And I think that like giving myself the mindfulness and giving myself just a few seconds to kind of breathe really helped with some of the thinking errors and catastrophizing and stuff that I would do, and that would lead to the suicidal thinking and the self-hatred that was so prominent in my case, and like impulsivity. So yeah, I 1 second was the greatest gift I was ever able to find myself, because like even now I still have a lot of intensity to me, And it's like, I have this mantra, like, you can always burn down the world tomorrow. And, I'll take a breath. Like, no need to blow up every situation, Clyde. Do what's helpful. And so that's kind of me. And yeah, now I kind of, I do the peer support and I do mentoring, and I find most of my healing in helping others to heal, to develop habits that can kind of um, get people through the day when they're dealing with a lot.
Nice side. Actually, I like that you can always burn down the world tomorrow. I might borrow that. Thank you. And last but not least, Andre, turning to you a little bit. So tell us a little bit about your BPD journey, kind of when you were diagnosed, what symptoms, if there were symptoms you particularly struggled with, and how they affected you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I was diagnosed around 7 years ago, a little bit after I graduated from college. A friend recommended I just get an evaluation, just noticed signs throughout the years that I didn't seem all the all the way stable, to say appropriately. And I first got diagnosed with bipolar, and then a year later, they diagnosed me with, I believe, which the proper diagnosis was BPD. So definitely dealing with that misdiagnosis wasn't much of an issue, but I recognize a lot of people deal with that. And I know for me, a lot of the symptoms I dealt with was the fear of abandonment, the unstable self-view, the constant mood swings. I heavily dealt with black and white thinking. My mindset was, if someone isn't for me, then they're not for me. I wouldn't necessarily make them my enemy, but there'd be extreme apathy towards them. And anger wasn't my cup of tea, but apathy and not caring about things was very heavy. And I didn't really care for myself, mostly due to just how I like grew up, and like it kind of materialized itself through that unstable self view during like COVID. I had like dyed my hair 3 different colors. I had different hairstyles. I had dreads, twists, braids. Now I'm just low cut, but I've had several different hairstyles throughout these few years, which can be alarming for like at least men in our friend groups, for us to see us with all of these different hairstyles and things like that. I was just trying to manifest the new identity or become someone new, or just I hated who I was currently, that I didn't want to explore or look at it. I just wanted to try something new to fix it. And it wasn't really working, honestly. And during that time I had lost my job, so I didn't have the money for um, health insurance for medicine. So I just was jumping between different therapies online, different medication, just paying out of pocket thousands of dollars during that time frame to really find inner peace. I told myself, I would rather be piss poor, broke, with a healthy, stable mind, rather than have all the money in the world and everything up here not make sense, and not being able to trust my own decisions. And for me, I've really worked on that fear of abandonment by just learning to love myself. As cliche as it sounds, I'd realized I tried to make everyone my best friend, but I wasn't my own best friend. So just learning how to be my own best friend, spending time with myself to the point where those negative thoughts no longer exist and they're gone now. So it's a lot more quiet up here. I used to, like, if I said something bad about myself, I'd have to catch it and be like, hey, why did I say that about myself? That if a friend said that about themselves in front of you, you would shut that down, validate them, encourage them. So can you do that for yourself? Can you give yourself a modicum of the love and grace you show others, and give it to yourself? Turn it inward. And so for me, once that was removed, I realized, all right, it's gone, but now I'm to myself a lot. So that's where I reached out and found Emotions Matter. I found other communities that I'm involved in, just to get, let me see how this is. There's a African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So now that I'm making more inner peace with myself and understanding myself, I want to go farther in life, and I realize I need a community for that. I need collaboration. I need connection. And that's what brought me here to Emotions Matter. That's a little bit of my story. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Thanks, Andre, and thank you all. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of open it as anybody who wants to kind of jump in. Now, I know this came up on several of you all about kind of the initial misdiagnosis. Apart from that, I want to ask about, are there any other things you think as being men, being male, kind of impacted treatment? I know when we, from the clinical perspective, when we talk about and study BPD, often people are thinking about women. So how does being men relate to anything you have experienced in terms of getting access to treatment, even getting a diagnosis, even getting legitimized? I know, I think Clyde, you said the initial therapist. I don't know if you think that has to do with you being a man as well. Yeah, I'll open up to any of y'all who would want to jump in.
I can take a stab at it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been interesting. I work in law enforcement for our provincial government, and being a male in that community has its own set of stigmas and requirements, and unspoken obligations, which are hard to fill, whether you're male, female, any color, any race. It's a different community of people. Amazing work, but just a different community of people to fit in, especially if as a man. And I work in an area of our government that is the enforcement branch is typically occupied predominantly by pretty rugged men, outdoorsy, rugged, feelings aren't part of the conversation at the hunt camp, right? So it's one of these things where being a male and trying to have a hard day was tough, right? I work my specific area where I deal with a lot of conflict with the public. And there's some days you just want somebody to talk to about that, especially knowing what I struggle with. And that community is not where I go for conversation, unless you get higher up in the leadership ranks. And then they're definitely open to that, but it's not what you're really looking for from the people in your sort of circle. So that's one aspect that's been very, very difficult, especially managing the anger side of it, right? So I've had to work very hard on my communication skills and learning to balance that well on the job. I'm a little more liberal when I'm off duty, but it's really difficult sometimes under deep conflict. And, I've found that in watching others in similar experience, whether they're male or female, there is a different perception that's received from, for example, just whether you're male or female, right? In that role, if you're getting verbal and confrontational, it can be seen as assertive. Whereas I'm like displaying those behaviors, it's aggressive or something that's excessive or unacceptable. So that's one side. And then getting the treatment, it's been a journey and a half being a male going through that. And I think the hardest part was really just finding somebody that could see past the immediate emotion, and recognize that there was something deeper than the first stop. As I see my people that have gone through my doctor's office, like PTSD is very common to come out of there. So it feels more like the uncertain place they land, and that's where you start, which is nobody's fault if you don't have the skills, right? So it's been really interesting by being a man, and the way that it's like has its prevalence at times. For me, anyway.
There was a point when you were mentioning that I saw everybody else nodding, so I'm going to which was kind of about the idea about kind of emotional expression as a man, not really having anybody to, when you're having like a rough day, to turn to, and so everybody else kind of nodding along. I don't know if others have thoughts or experiences about kind of being man, masculinity, how it relates to this. Brad, so you unmuted, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I will kind of piggyback on what Oliver was saying, and my experience is kind of the other end of the spectrum, whereas like my view of myself is like super in touch with my emotions, and I'm very like I didn't consider the societal pressures that are put on men, that I was affected by those things. So for my getting treatment, the first barrier was me, where I perceived that I was very aware of myself and kind of what was going on, but I was suppressing all these emotions and not being in touch. I was just pretending to be in touch to the outside world. Um, so yeah, the image of myself that I had did not match what I was actually doing. And it wasn't until later that I realized, yeah, like, not sharing your emotions and being strong and these things, uh, even though I was always encouraged to open up and share, and I had these outlets, I would never use them. And I took great pains, not to share who I actually was. And it wasn't until, I was kind of backed into a corner of, thinking, okay, um, I need to make a choice here, whether I'm going to live a very short life or do something about this and have a longer, happier life. So then once I first got into therapy, I was diagnosed first with depression and then anxiety and then PTSD, these kind of common things. But I also recognize that part of that was, I was only sharing as much as I was willing to, or kind of very surface level. But, again, from what Oliver had said too, going in or being an alcoholic or abusing drugs, that's something that's very easy to, kind of like treatable, like, okay, we can treat this, but digging deeper into that, BPD spectrum, was not something, I didn't even know about it. So I didn't even know what I needed to advocate for myself because it's just not even talked about in male spaces, or at least none of the male spaces that I have ever been in. So it's.
So Brad, let me
Yeah.
ask you, am I understanding correctly? Is it that you initially felt like you were in touch with your emotions, but then you realized later on, actually, no, I wasn't. I was still kind of suppressing and not. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I had, almost like kind of the opposite view. I had a culture of people around me that wanted me to share my emotions, as opposed to,
I see.
Oliver's experience with, being in the police force, and that's obviously a very kind of like, hey, be tough. But
Yeah.
I had my own armor on that I was like, oh yeah, I'm
I
sharing
see.
stuff with you, but I'm not. I was, you know faking it basically to the rest of the world
Okay.
until, yeah. But that's been, my personal experience. And then once getting into treatment, it's been a lot of advocating for myself in therapy. Not necessarily to convince a therapist like that I suffer from BPD, but I've created so many effective coping mechanisms over the decades that people don't see it. And I really have to push myself to advocate for myself, which is something I'm not comfortable doing. So, it's almost a double-edged sword. I have to fight harder when my BPD is
Would it
actually
be right to
holding me
say
back.
then? Sorry, Brad. Would it be right to say then it's kind of, you said you've developed these coping mechanisms that have served you well so far, but underneath, is it the challenge of also getting kind of vulnerable beyond the coping mechanisms, kind of keep us at bay a little bit, and then it's like the hard part
Absolutely.
is getting down and getting a little bit vulnerable, especially as men. Sometimes it's challenging. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Clyde and Andre, I don't know if you had any other thoughts about any of the things that being a man, being male, impacted your access in any way to treatments to get into diagnosis so far?
For me, mine will be brief. I want to say no. I got diagnosed when I was very young, and a lot of my there's a lot of intersectionality because I'm also a black man, and there's a lot more issues with that than there was being a male. And so maybe there's a naivety to me or ignorance that I didn't notice any mistreatment or misunderstanding to my said issues or my mental health services. But I can't deny I have friends in many different circles that have spoken about it to me, and it made me look at things with a different eye to see, hmm, did it impact me? And as I look back on it, I can't really recall anything. I just there's too much self-turmoil inward for me to recognize if any doctor or therapist or even acquaintance I said something to judged me for my BPD or whatever I may be
Right.
dealing with. So it was just not an area I could focus on. There was so much hate inward that I couldn't give a care towards anyone's judgment externally. One of the few things I do appreciate with some difficulties in life, like other people's opinions didn't have too much stock when I devalued myself on a daily basis formally.
I see. Okay, thanks, Audrey. What you mentioned, I think maybe a year ago, we had a panel for folks of color, and I think one of the things that came up quite a bit was the initial misdiagnosis on bipolar. I was the moderator then, so I guess they're recorded somewhere. Bipolar disorder being one of the very common ones among folks on that panel. Clyde, I know you had unmuted earlier if you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say, but like part of my experience has been what Andre said about like this self-hatred. And like growing up, it was never okay to express my emotions. Like that led to bad treatment. And so I learned to just disappear. And like even when I was with people, I would be on the edge. I would get them comfortable with me being there, but I had no intention of making a connection where I could be rejected later. And I was nearly 30 before I learned to make these connections with people. And it like speaking of the masculinity, like I've always considered myself very in touch with femininity. Like even now I consider myself more of a yin male, like very like I identify with being a male physically, but I'm generally more of a nurturing type of a soul, kind of supportive in my way of presenting to the world. And that wasn't okay growing up. Like you had to be a tough guy or just keep your mouth shut. And so like when my symptoms got really bad, it was hard to navigate that. And I would just like every situation. If I would get mad at someone, I would turn it in on myself. If I would get mad at myself, I would amp it up and turn it against myself. And so most of my 20s and early 30s was sent just ruminating about suicidal thoughts and just being very, you know, my thoughts were continually re-traumatizing me. And after it had been over 20 hospitalizations. I just said, what am I doing? Like, I'm spending all of this time trying to plan to kill myself. It's ineffective. Like, what if I spent all this time just taking care of myself, doing self-care? And so, like, I would just like if I was in a situation and like I was ready to do my BPD thing, blow it up, be angry, be emotional, I would just say to myself, all right, Clyde, you want to be a hero or an asshole? Like the choice is now. And, you know, sometimes I made the right choice. And, you know, it's just lost track of where I was. But yeah, it's been really hard to kind of navigate some of the emotionality and some of that stigma behind it. Like, I know a lot of, I'm a very large man, and so when I get angry, people get very frightened, and
Okay.
so yeah, so I have to really kind of manage that. But what I've found is that like along with these BPD symptoms, there's a certain like an empathy of sorts that makes me able to maneuver the energy in a room emotionally. And so, like, if I'm not blowing a situation up, I can be grounded and others kind of ground around me. So that's kind of one of the beauties of the emotionality.
Thanks. Okay, I have two more questions, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. The first one is kind of, you'll allude to some of it, is are there ways that you think BPD might manifest among men that might get overlooked or disregarded? And then the second question I'm going to ask is, where do you find community? What has been the place you find community and support? So anybody's open to taking either of those two questions.
Community and support, I'll jump on.
Sure.
Because just listening to you guys, it's like just like the men's group again. We're sitting, I'm like, I resonate with everything you say. Community for me has been, so somebody asked me once, like, what's your spirit creature? And I was like, what do you mean? You know, we were in the copy room and I thought about it and I said to myself, you know, am I a cockroach or am I a chameleon? Right? Am I impossible to kill or great at hiding, or am I really good at hiding? And then I thought, you know, I'm a chameleon, right? That's my superpower. Like you were saying, Brad, like you develop this, I called it high functioning, but like the inner you and what you present and is acceptable to the world that allows you to get where you need to go to a degree. But community, like being a man and joining even general BPD groups, if I felt heard, but going through my, you know, addiction with alcohol, I got connected with a male sponsor. And that was my first introduction to the power of another man and community. But I still didn't fit in, right? But it was like, ooh, that works. And then through Emotions Matter, I started to realize that the community with that suffers with BPD generally, not specific sub-community stuff, you feel really understood. So, right, I'm that chameleon, but I'm, you know, just now comfortable walking around, right? But I'm still like a chameleon. But in the men's group, I don't know if you guys have seen that TELUS commercial where the chameleon's like vibrant multicolors and it's dancing across the screen. And it's just like having a day being itself and everybody's loving it. And that to me is what the community and the power of this men's group, like I totally feel me. And after 44 years of not having that, like, thank you.
So the men's group for you, the men's group kind of provides community and a sense of belonging and sameness, which maybe wasn't always present in other places or groups even.
Absolutely, like
folks?
extremely hard to find. In here, it was immediate. Like you didn't have to work at it. It just was a natural occurrence. Like when you put the magnets the right way and they stick together. That to me was beautiful. And I promote it everywhere I go, right? Like not just community, but find the right group within that community and you will be, it's magical, right? Like powerful and magical are both great, but one's incredible. It keeps me
How
alive.
about others? Where have you all found? Oh, sorry, Alba.
Oh, it's okay. I just blurted that out.
Perfect. How about others? Where have you all found community?
I mean, very similar to Oliver. The men's group and Emotions Matter has been an instrumental part of my community. For me, I always viewed the words, you know, masculinity or being a man in a very toxic lens. Like that was something not to be, even though if I'm around, you know, other men, I, you know, just go with the flow and whatever. But I think I was scared of embracing or even portraying the fact of like being a man. You know, being a man was, you know, associated with me with like being sexist or objectifying things or, you know, so I would really suppress again my emotions and try to present a version of myself that I thought should be, you know, presented. And yeah, it wasn't until I got in the men's group really that I allowed myself to realize like, oh, there are certain things that I struggle with that are unique to being a man, and that's okay. You know, like I wouldn't even kind of allow myself to explore it. You know, when Clyde mentioned earlier, you know, getting upset, you know, as a man, and I'm a pretty big guy too, you know, 5'10", 225 pounds, but I view myself as, you know, a 14-year-old child, threatening. But if I allow myself to get angry or lose control, then you know, how I view myself is not what other people I think are experiencing. So, and again, I would go to great lengths to try to control that and to keep a really tight lid on it. So, yeah, there were parts of myself that I just closed off.
There's a question, it's from Benjamin in the Q&A, that it's framed as quiet BPD, especially men are taught kind of to hide our emotions, not to express emotions. Do you think that's something that's particularly challenging for men, especially men struggling with BPD?
Yeah, I think so. And I certainly identify on the BPD spectrum in that quote unquote quiet BPD realm where everything's really directed inwards and you're presenting a different person. So yeah, and I think that's encouraged in culture with men, you know, is to, you know, if you got a problem, you know, you deal with it, you know, you're there for other people. So yeah. And once I got into the men's group, I was like, oh, wow, I can just be Brad. And that's probably never really happened because I never really knew who Brad was. So that's been kind of my.
Well, let me ask you a kind of a follow-up to that. So, I mean, everybody's mentioned I kind of just struggle with like emotions, expressions, things like that. What's been helpful for any of y'all in learning to navigate emotional expression or even recognizing your own emotions? Are there any tips that you found have been particularly helpful that you can think about or mention?
Yeah.
Right, yeah, what do you think?
I can definitely talk about this. I find, you know, when I'm dysregulated, doing some kind of movement, you know, doing a house chore, some yoga, going for a walk, playing with the dog, things like that. Also, journaling is, I always talk about journaling. It really allows clarity of thought, expression of emotion, and, like you know, therapy and having positive supportive peers.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the biggest things for me.
Any other tips from the panel?
I can pick up on what some of Clyde said there. You know, journaling for me has been fantastic too. Like I'm a fountain pen guy now because I love that like it's just so soothing. But I was a very destructive journaler, like dark when I journaled and I was in deep.
So kind of
Just
ruminating then?
What's that, Craig?
I was gonna say, so is it more like, was journaling then initially more ruminating then? So not
Oh,
really
it
as
was
helpful?
it was rumination. It was self-destruct. It was on paper how much I hate
Okay.
myself, what I want to do to myself, how like. But it was something my wife found one day. I was like,
Okay.
ooh, that's risky writing that stuff in a book. So I started writing it in a computer, and then it was just endless. And it's evolved today to now I do it to be constructive because the dark journaling, it just really puts me in a hole. It doesn't help, but I use a program not to promote any one thing. But it's called Stoic. And I don't believe in
Okay.
stoicism or anything, like I'm not down that line. But it has an AI component to it that when I write my daily, like begin your day, and it says write your summary of your day. And if I'm in a bad mood and I say, you know, my day's going to suck, I hate myself, I'm going to do this to myself, it's not going to go well, it responds and says exactly how we validate and acknowledge each other in this room. But then it says to you, you know, is there any moments of light that you found in that darkness that helped? Right. So it has this like positive pivot at the end to my journaling, which continues to move me out of it in a better space. That was definitely one thing. And the other thing that I'll say, and I try to say this once people start sharing their story, I think we've all experienced this, is sharing your story can be good and bad. There's people that understand it, are willing to hear it, and then accept you afterwards. And there's other people that if you share your story, it could scare them, right? They respond in a way you didn't want. And then it becomes a negative reaction. So I've learned to hone how I share and who I share with to ensure that I get the right response that I need from that sharing. So it's been an evolution of that to a place now
Okay.
where, like in the men's group, like Brad said, there's a whole, like, people do not know. I'm incredibly invisible with hiding my my inner struggles with BPD, especially at work. Like, you wouldn't know. My boss had no idea I was going off work. 5 days I was gone, and I was off for 3. Like, it was critical. There was no run up to that. It was just snap. So I find that that's why I like the men's group specifically, because I can just be Oliver. I can just, like,
Mhm.
if I'm good and I can help others, and that's good. If not, they help me. And that's like the tip I really try to give is find that group that's within the group that maybe is within the group, because they're there, they're waiting for you. And then Emotions Matter, we're trying to get more groups to sort that out. But it's been powerful once I figured that out.
So big piece in there is kind of finding your people, whatever those look like, because there is inherent risk of finding your people because, I mean, opening up is being vulnerable, which could open you up to rejection. Now, I like hearing these tips. There was a question there about kind of more in the moment. Like in the moment, when you're extremely emotional, dealing with strong emotions, and kind of feeling more dysregulated, how do you deal with work productively when dealing with these intense emotions? Are there any tips that you'll think of, like, in this specific moment, not just generally these are helpful, like journaling as a long-term thing, or that you all find helpful for yourselves?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I know for me, I had an old therapist tell me, like, is this course of action conducive to the life I want to live, the person I want to be, the
Okay.
direction I want to go? And it's really saved me a lot. And then I have a married friend who said this advice: you can either be right or you can be happy. And so, whatever words or decisions I may want to go about saying or doing, I may be whatever justified in feeling them, but what will it accomplish when I am right at the end of the day and it's cost me a friendship, relationship, or whatever, or it's just tarnished my reputation in a way that my emotional reaction has created that said issue. So remembering, like, is this crash out? Is this emotional expression? Standing up for myself is different versus just negatively
Yeah.
reacting or succumbing to my emotions. Trying to
So
remember,
if I'm
is
hearing
am I
correctly, it's
more
kind
than
of like,
this?
so Andre, is it kind of like in the moment, find a way to slow it down a little bit so you could have that clarity to think about that? I mean, my
Yes.
version is I like using, do I want to be right or effective? That's what I tell my own students. But how do you slow it down? I mean, in the moment when you're feeling really intensely emotional, are there any things that help you slow things down in those points?
Water. For me,
Okay.
running water, like I say, the woods and the water are the best medication for me. So if I'm close to running
Okay.
water, it's incredibly soothing. Like the right, so if I put earbud, like if I'm really dysregulated, like today, I've had a tough moment where it's just like this. I put the earbuds in, put the right song on, and it's like, it's just life changing on my vibration, right? So
Okay.
in the moment, like notwithstanding unproductive things like self-harm, which I found don't help me in the long term, the music is a safe way for me to just, I'm in another world, right? And I can be driving and still drive, which is good.
Mhm.
But I stop road raging, right? So if
Okay.
you're like that immediate response for me is like, oh my God, I'm on somebody's tail, put the earbuds in, and then I'm getting honked at because I'm like doing 70 and just cruising. But that is so powerful to me. But the right music, like ADHD, I struggle with hard, and Endel is a great app for putting on stuff to help change the sounds that you're hearing. So at work I listen to it when I'm dysregulated and I can focus better.
Okay.
But it's I don't just throw it on when I'm okay, but it's totally powerful in the moment.
Right.
If the guys
Right.
aren't
So yeah,
available,
Yeah.
right? We call each other sometimes through the like middle of the day, like, dude, I'm struggling. So the power of the men's group in the moment has also been there. Forgot to plug that. Sorry,
I'll
Glenn.
just piggyback on what Oliver was saying, with running water. For me, I need something that really shocks my system. So, tip skills and, difference in temperature. Like I need something like an ice, like to dunk my head in like an ice bath. Like holding an ice cube a lot of times won't be enough. So something like that, or like really intense physical activity, is another way that I cope, in the moment. And also allowing myself to walk away from a situation and not force myself to say, oh, I owe it to this other person or the situation to be here. And if I leave, then I'm disrespecting them, recognizing like, hey, I'm really dysregulated right now. I need to step away and do something for myself to bring myself down from a 10 to a 7 or a 6. So those are some immediate things that I try to use.
Yeah. For me, I'd say it's turning my anger into a restraint to do the right thing. Like every time I want to do something very volatile, just saying, no, put that energy into something helpful. And that's another thing from ACT is, all right, Clyde, you have your reactive thought, but what is the helpful thought? Until you have a helpful thought, don't do anything. And just, yeah, it's about bottling it up. Well, not bottling up, but holding it until it can be released properly, not as an explosion, but as a steam release.
So we're hearing a lot of ways to slow things down and kind of bring the process backward. There was one question about for the people who journal, do you use any prompts or is it just kind of like open scribing?
I'm both.
Both? Okay.
Yeah, I interchange journaling into my like task list, right? You'll have like a thought or a moment that comes into that, like balancing it in the moment. But for me, the prompts is where I have to go. Otherwise, I spend most of my life dysregulated or having
Okay.
dark, self-destructive thoughts and talk. So it's like you give me a pen and no prompt, you'll probably see a
I
darker
see.
outcome, even if it's not dark, versus if I was asked any question and then
Yeah.
I just can flow on it. So that to me has helped a lot.
So going in with some intention, glad you were going to say something as well.
Oh yeah. I've got a whole routine. I think like a task list, I definitely keep a to-do list. I keep track of my day and I give myself stickers to reward myself for following my values, following my tasks, stuff like that. So like just finding my inner joy as a 3-year-old. And then I have prompts as well. I have these questions that I answer every day. Things like how now I can't think of them in the moment. Like what is my reason for being a mentor, that type of thing, or like how can I be a more mindful dog dad? And I'll just give an answer to those questions over and over again until when that bad story comes up, I'm like, no, Clyde, you've written hundreds of times the good things about yourself. So just stop that.
Do you go back and look at them? Like, is that like as a reminder of like, hey, I've done stuff that's valid, that's worthwhile, especially when you get into those dark places?
Well, it's not so much looking back. I do
Okay.
that, but it's more of just, Clyde, you've been journaling for years and answering the question of how am I capable? Don't tell me that you can't do this. Like, yeah, just accepting a better story than the one I historically told myself.
I see Sarah is here, so I think that is our time to wrap it up.
Yes, I know
Thank
this
you
has been
all.
so exciting, and I know I really don't want to stop it at all, but we do have only a minute left. Thank you so much, Craig. And thank you all the panelists on behalf of Emotions Matter. We thank you so much for all your insight. Thank you everybody for your comments in the chat and for your questions. I'm sorry if we couldn't get to all your questions. If you have an individual specific question that wasn't answered, please feel free to email us at info@emotionsmatterbpd.org. Then we have a very exciting event coming up. On June 1st, Sunday, Emotions Matter is hosting our annual Walk for BPD. And you can join us in person at Hudson River Park in New York City or virtually from anywhere in the world. So this walk is more than just a fundraiser. It's a powerful way to raise awareness, show support, and build community for those living with BPD. And our goal is to get participants involved from all 50 states and beyond as we celebrate our 10th anniversary as an organization. So to learn more or register, go to our website, emotionsmatterbpd.org. And we really hope to see you there. And together we can walk to make emotions matter. I believe the link was put in the chat. Yes. Let's see. I think Elizabeth, are you putting the link in the chat? Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I can't do everything. And then lastly, we value your feedback. So please complete our post-event survey. We are putting it in the chat. This is your opportunity to provide feedback about this program and how we can improve your experience. So you'll also get this tomorrow in a post-event email. We love to hear your feedback. Thank you, everybody. I know it's 8 o'clock. We'll wrap up. Thank you for being part of our BPD Fest 2025 webinar series. It's been fantastic, these 4 Wednesdays with ongoing pathways to well-being. Stay tuned for additional webinars coming up in the coming months. And videos of these presentations will be available after the webinar series this summer. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Take care, everyone. Thanks.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.